Hey there, I'm Brom Bresenham, and this is the launch retrospective of my new game, Tomb Sweeper. Tomb Sweeper was recently released for iOS and Android. This retrospective is a look back at the development timeline and tech stack, my experiences with AI tools, my design decisions, insights, and lessons learned. The code base spans three different software projects. First, there's the actual game, and then it's built using my new game framework called Warlock, which uses the SDL3, BGFX, and Mini Audio libraries as part of its core implementation. But the Warlock library itself, or the Warlock game framework itself, is written in my Rogue computer language. And so just using the number of commits across each project during the same time frame as a rough estimate, which is fair, I think. It's rough but fair. Game commits are about 45% of the total, Warlock 23%, Rogue 32%. But really, Rogue and Warlock together are the infrastructure, and then the game is built on top of that. Because as I'm developing Warlock, the game framework, if I find something that's if I'm creating something that can be sort of a general purpose utility for a variety of programs, I stick it in the Rogue standard library. For example, math, matrix math libraries, and UI or user interface layout libraries, things like that. Stuff that's implementation independent. So, yeah, most of the changes to Rogue were in support additional libraries in support of Warlock. Let's look at the timeline. So at the end of 2024, I was working on a different game, Axor the Mighty, which has been in development off and on for a long time. I had just restarted it again. I was doing essentially like console-based development at that point, just logic and data structures, getting that working. And so I was working on Rogue, as I always am, adding some features to it. And then towards the very end of December, I started working on my Warlock game framework. So the actual graphical user interface capabilities. And yeah, you can read the different features I was working on at that point in time. I'm not going to go over them point by point. But then, Axor, I felt like I was going to take a while longer. And I had an idea for a game I wanted to make. I thought it would be something really just kind of quick to just bust out. So I paused Axor the Mighty and I started Tomb Sweeper, which I thought might take, couple, like if I really cranked on it, maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month. And so that took the rest of the year to complete. For the first 7 months, I worked on these different features one by one. I will mention a few things specifically later on, but that got me up to a good minimum viable product, MVP. I should have just released there. I should have just released then, started building some users. But I went ahead and feature creeped and started working on the back end, adding a back end with like Magic Link sign in, OAuth, authentication, leaderboards, and I added the ad mob system, and then I later added Unity ads. I'll go over those in a little more detail. During that time, I did various things on Warlock. I was working on Warlock and Rogue pretty much every day, so I just kind of clumped together some of the highlights. The empty spaces don't mean no work was going on. It's just minor changes, small things not worth adding in. And so the game launch happened, version 1.0 happened to coincide with December 25th, Christmas. So that was a nice little treat for myself. I had started submitting to Apple a couple weeks beforehand, working through issues there, submitted to Google like a week or 5 days beforehand. Just didn't hear anything back. Apple approved a couple days before Christmas. Google and the Play Store, just I was in limbo with them, and then all of a sudden on Christmas morning, it's like, okay, it's approved. So I launched it with AdMob and without a backend or leaderboard, and I'll talk about that, like the reasons why, a little bit later. I realized I needed to replace AdMob, so I replaced it with Unity Ads on both platforms. Released that update on January 6th of this year, and then I released the current version 1.2 with the backend, added backend, the backend and leaderboard and user accounts on January 27th. All right, let's take a quick look at my development environment and tools. I'm a pretty old school programmer, so I just got a single monitor going, MacBook Air kind of docked with it with an external keyboard and mouse, some iOS devices, some Android devices. For my IDE, I use Terminal and MacVim. I have nothing against other modern editors like Visual Studio Code, but it always just feels, to me, just feels a little slow, a little laggy. I prefer the snappiness of MacVim to get her done. As far as different frameworks and libraries I used, I glossed over a lot of these already. Also, I'll point out there's libtest2, a tessellation library, lets you convert arbitrary polygons into triangles, which is good for making, like programmatically creating little 3D models of like tile fragments. And I use the Postmark email service. So backend list lets you send some emails built in, but only in line with their like standard account login system. And so if you want to do like something a little custom, like a magic link email, you need an external email service like Postmark. I've been real happy with it. For editing images, I use Photoshop and Vimage, both all the time. Vimage is my own Vim-like image editor. It's on my repo if you want to check it out. For image editing, there's, audio editing, I mostly use Audacity, a little bit of Vector 3, a little bit of Reaper. For AI, I used all these things. I'll mention them in more detail later. ChatGPT, Midjourney, Magnific, or is it Magnifique? Claude, Grok, Scenario, 11 Labs. For editing videos, so like for store video previews for the app stores, I use ScreenFlow and Camtasia, and of course also for this presentation. For this presentation, I'm using Keynote for the slides. I used to like try and make slides like in Camtasia, but I realized I can just make them in something that's designed for that and then just record it. I like Camtasia. Well, Camtasia is a little more full-featured in some ways. Like it lets you record the video screen, lets you record the screen and the webcam at the same time, which I don't believe ScreenFlow does. I didn't see the option there. But I like the editing experience in ScreenFlow a little better, so yeah, I end up using both. One nice thing about Keynote is you can use your iPhone as a remote control. So I'm advancing through this presentation just using my iPhone. And Handbrake is a handy little tool. If you got like a large video, you can often get, or a video like the videos that my Android tablet records it's easy for them to kind of get a little corrupted if I move the cursor into the video and then back in reverse again, then the screen gets garbled, not enough keyframes or something. Anyways, Handbrake is great at re-encoding videos to be compact and robust. And then for commercial art assets, I also made use of Envato SoundSnap and a little bit of the Unity Asset Store. All right, let's look at the inception of Tomb Sweeper. Inception is more than a mind-bending sci-fi dreamscape. It also means the start of something. So, Tomb Sweeper was inspired by two different Minesweeper variants. First off, some years ago, I played, like 5 to 10 years ago, I played Temple Minesweeper on iPhone and enjoyed it. And it was the most polished Minesweeper variant I had ever played at the time. And yeah, it just had a nice feel to it. And then it just stopped working on iPhone. It's still available. You can download it, but it just doesn't work. You can start a game, but then you can't tap on anything. So something broke, and they're not bothering to fix it. And then also over the years, I've enjoyed playing Momono Sweeper. It's very crude and simple in most ways, but it does have this progression that I really like that Tomb Sweeper adopted as well. And one of my core pieces of game philosophy is I just make the games I want to play. And I tend not to try and get in on the popular game ideas that everyone else is trying to also get in on. Like, especially because if there's like a good game there that's popular and if I enjoy playing it, I'm happy to just play that. I don't need to make anything else. But I make the games I want to play, and a lot of times that ends up being games that like these, like Temple Minesweeper, you can't really play anymore. Momono Sweeper, not available for iPhone, also very crude, very rough. And so in cases like that, there's this low-hanging fruit of games that I really enjoy that I can't play or that I think I could make a better version of. And yeah, I'm happy to develop those games. And yeah, I planned to just make full use of commercial assets, a little bit of AI art, and just get her done, whip out the game in 2 to 4 weeks. That was optimistic for sure, but I knew it was overly optimistic, but I did not think it would take a year. And on the note of like Minesweeper, I feel like Tomb Sweeper and Momono Sweeper fixed a core issue of Minesweeper. So Minesweeper is an undeniable classic, and yet it feels unsatisfying to be marking the bombs and avoiding the bombs, but never actually revealing them in Minesweeper. So you're always avoiding the danger, never facing it, never sort of neutralizing it, not really. And sort of as part of that, you don't actually win by marking all the bombs, you win by revealing all the empty squares. And I understand why, due to the mechanics, but it just it always felt a little backwards. And in addition, marking and revealing is often implemented as two modes of operation, and it feels a little clunky. By the way, I made a version of Minesweeper that I never released, which did it a little more smoothly. You're welcome to borrow the idea. One tap would set a flag. A second tap on a flag would reveal the tile, and then a long press would clear the flag. So pretty much you're able to just go around like quickly, tap, 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 tap to reveal tiles. And it felt a lot smoother than always having to switch between the flag mode and the reveal mode. But yeah, Momono Sweeper and now Tomb Sweeper are much more satisfying in my opinion. You still have to figure out where things are. You have to avoid the stronger monsters, the larger dangers, but you get to reveal the weaker monsters, reveal some of the dangers while leveling up, and you win by revealing all of the monsters, not by revealing all the empty squares. And I think it really does, to me, for me personally at least, it really just, that concept fixes a sort of fundamental problem or thing I never quite liked about Minesweeper. Problem was too strong a word, but yeah, something I never quite sat right with me. If there's any single reference for what I'd like my game to be, this game, Tomb Sweeper, it's like a game of solitaire, not in the card mechanics, but in a potentially winnable randomized scenario, something you can just pick up and play, and you know the rules, and hopefully you enjoy the mechanics, but it's a different scenario, and it's always something a little different. I like that. And then it's interesting to me that solitaire is almost a roguelike if you think about it in certain terms. And I think a roguelike is also a potentially winnable randomized scenario. The essence of solitaire, in a sense, not the mechanics, but the appeal in a way, with added progression through stages of varying difficulty and complexity, and generally includes the accumulation of items and abilities as well. And then it's occurred to me, thinking about this, that these are essentially cycles. Solitaire is you start it, and like a lot of casual games, it's essentially things are all out of order, and you need to like put them in order. But anyways, it's a cycle of things being out of order and then completing them, things being in order. And then Rogue is, you've got that same essence and then these meta cycles. So you complete this level or you level up, and then you go down to the next level and you do it again, and you get more abilities, and then you die, and then the cycle starts over again. And I think that's a really important concept in game design. That's really at the core of a lot of what we find enjoyable and compelling. And so in this game, as part of it too, and I actually added these in before I was really thinking of things in these terms, but it just seemed like a natural fit. So I think it's interesting to look at, and I think it's fun to play in the game, where there are these different cycles of difficulty within the game. So in Tomb Sweeper, every 10 levels is a cycle of increasing level size and complexity, from small levels and not that many high-level monsters up to large levels, extra large levels, and like a lot of monsters and more a greater density. And then it repeats every 10 levels. And then it starts at the small levels again. And I think that's really fun because there's always something, not necessarily new, but just always something different around the corner. And by the time you're getting bored of the small levels, it's time for the medium levels, and so on and so forth. And then there's a meta cycle on top of that. And so every set of 10 levels increases in overall difficulty, which resets again after every 100 levels. So level 1 to 100, every 10 levels is slightly harder than the previous 10. And then level 101, it starts off at a low level of difficulty, overall difficulty again, and then kind of like ramps up. And yeah, to me, that's just really enjoyable. Feels like there's always something a little fresh to do. Cycles within cycles. In the early days, my placeholder title, little trivia here, was called Temple Momono Sweeper. Just jammed all those words together. Briefly called Mayan Sweeper. Is that clever or is it too dorky? I don't know. Pretty clever in my opinion. It's both. It's clever and dorky. Early gameplay just used simple color blocks and a built-in framework font while core gameplay was being developed. And that's definitely a piece of advice I have. Always use placeholder graphics in the beginning. Don't devote time to integrating real graphics until gameplay is nailed down. Early testing often changes gameplay, which changes graphical requirements. I've been a part of a team where several teams I think, where I was basically just the programmer and the design and the art. I would get the design and the art, the game design and art together. And then as I was implementing the game, we would realize, this designed feature just isn't, or this mechanic or whatever, just isn't going to work because of unforeseen reasons. So, and then we'd have to throw out some of the graphics that were already done. So, now in Tomb Sweeper, I could have used better graphics in the beginning. I don't think there was going to be too much gameplay changing, but just in general, it's a good strategy. For the tile art, for the tiles that cover the board that you break, I always planned to use AI for that. Thought it was just going to be like 8 things. I was using AI for 8 tiles. I used Midjourney for the first half of them, but Midjourney wasn't good at creating an Ankh symbol or an Eye of Horus symbol. So I switched to Scenario for that, and it did a good job. So I created the second set of 4 tiles with Scenario. And of course, they're wildly different shades and everything, and I did some sort of normalization on them and gave them the same one of 2 borders. The original art, AI art these days has been 1024 by 1024. So, and then I ship the game with 300 by 300 pixel tiles, and that works well with that's plenty of density for even high density devices like iPad Pro. Here's a look at some of the original AI results, tile results. At the bottom is my first prompt in this game. I was just like, give me an Egyptian themed tile. Gave me something kind of like a bird and something like a pharaoh. So then I drilled down on that. I was like, okay, give me some bird options and then give me some pharaoh options. And you'll see the bird, second row, second from the left, was used in the game, and the pharaoh, top right, was used in the game. Now for the monsters, I planned on just purchasing some kind of monster assets, hopefully animated from the asset store, and just get all that done real quick. But I couldn't find a decent variety of realistic monsters that fit an Egyptian theme. But the even bigger problem was that after incorporating several realistic monsters in the game, then uncovering them just felt creepy and unsettling. And I'm not even squeamish about spiders and so on, but it just wasn't a good vibe playing the game. So, certainly not a casual game that I hoped, like general people would enjoy. You don't want to be like grossed out by your puzzle game. So I moved on to trying different alternatives. For a while, I was looking at doing like cutting out. It's pronounced bas relief, if you can believe that. I was always pronouncing it bas relief, which I think is pretty legit, but then I looked it up just before making this video, and it's called bas relief, so now I know. But yes, bas relief. So my idea was to kind of stick with a tiled concept, but the overall effect would be kind of like having a statue, but just squashed down to fit the overall tiling aesthetic. And then, that's a decent look, I think. But then a happy accident happened. I had just finished creating a scorpion bas relief tile, and I honestly don't remember if I had any kind of plan or thought of glass figurines or not, but I just asked ChatGPT, I was like, create an image of an orange glass scorpion. And bam, it made a beautiful orange glass scorpion that's not weird and disgusting. And I hadn't known what I was looking for exactly, but I knew that was the look I wanted once I saw it. So quickly changed gears and started making glass figurines. Created them mostly iteratively in ChatGPT, touched them up in Photoshop, upscaled in Magnific. And let me mention that Photoshop's remove background and generative fill makes it an essential tool for tweaking AI art. It's so convenient for making little tweaks because it can fill in the gaps, it can extend the edges. Of course, like I guess now Nano Banana could fill a lot of those roles, but at the time, and still, I think Photoshop is a good option. Take a quick look at the glass figurine process for making Horus. Now, again, these days could probably do most of this with Nano Banana, but I did all this a year ago, or roughly a year ago, before Nano Banana ever came out. So this was still a good option. So first I had ChatGPT create a figurine. It gave it a dumb little hat. I asked it to remove the hat and be holding the staff of Horus. All right, looks good. Not much detail. So then I asked for more detail. I asked it to add an ankh in its other hand. I ended up cropping out the bottom, so the ankh didn't matter, but a nice improvement. Then I asked for it to make some parts of it yellow or gold. And finally, I took the whole image, I tweaked it in Photoshop, messed with it, and then I thought, this doesn't look glassy enough or as glassy as the other figurines. So I brought the whole image back in and I said, make it look more like translucent glass. And it did a great job of that. Here are the 7 figurines I ended up with: Scarab, Beetle, Snake, Scorpion, Pharaoh, Death Mask, Skeleton Soldier, or perhaps Pharaoh Skeleton, and then Horus and Anubis. If you're wondering what made me decide to face some of them right and some of them left, I basically just, number one, took whatever AI gave me, and that was fine. Or, with the additional caveat of I always wanted my light source to appear to be coming from the top left for consistency. So some of them I flipped just to get that light source adjusted. And then once I was doing the glass figurines, then I wanted to do that glass figurine aesthetic for the rest of the background screens and so on. So here's an example of several Midjourney prompts. If I just asked for a scene that was made of glass, it would do something weird like put it all in a big glass ball. But if I asked for a diorama with glass figurines, then it got basically the look I was going for. In this case, the top left, I liked the look of that overall. I asked for some variations, and you can maybe spot that the bottom left is the one I ended up going with in the game here. And again, flipped it horizontally so that the light was coming from the top left. Same thing with the user interface. I'd originally been thinking like Egyptian stone or something, but the glass, I thought that idea worked even better. Here's some variations AI created for me. I ended up using the bottom left one, and I used Photoshop Generative Fill to get rid of those little sort of rivets in the corners. Some reflections on AI art. I know AI art has been controversial. I think it's getting a little more mainstream with developers, which is good. For myself, as an indie developer with modest art skills on a budget, AI let me make high-quality game art for a low cost in a reasonable time frame. So I love it. Now, AI art was still a large time sink for this project. I would much rather commission an art team to make the art, or AI art, if I have the budget. I don't care if they make regular art or AI art, just as long as it looks good, etc. Or 3D rendered art. Anything's fine, but yeah, I just don't want to spend the time on it, ideally. So if I can, I would still rather have an art team work on it. AI is great at creating static images and videos, and even 3D models from 2D images. However, many polished 2D games require skeletal 2D animation via tools such as Spine and Spriter. And there's currently no direct AI support for creating such animation. So that is a big limitation of using AI for 2D, in my opinion, and another reason to work with some real human artists so they can do that. Speaking of artists, I work with a freelance art team off and on. I had them make my new Perilous Quest logo. I worked with them before the advent of AI art, and it's interesting to note that far from being disrupted by AI, that art team is fully leveraging AI. And so they've always created art in these stages. Now, these are my names for their stages, not their names, but my names they go from concept sketches to color-filled line art to piecewise rendering, where an artist takes a different piece of the overall scene and does a high quality, realistic looking drawing, art of that piece. And then finally, scene integration, where all the pieces are blended together again. And so the artists now, they do everything manually still, except for the rendering. Clients have the option of opting out of the AI, but if AI rendering is approved, then the rendering happens much faster and costs much less. So for me, I am happy to have more art at a lower cost. Like I'm happy to have art turn around faster at a lower cost, and I think it's going to be like definitely high quality as well. So yeah, I feel like AI art is a force multiplier for both indie developers and artists. Indie developers can bootstrap their projects with AI art, but established developers still need art teams to save time to implement animations and for complex art that is beyond AI's capabilities. Like that logo, I did a bunch of mock-ups with AI, couldn't get anything close to looking that cool, but yeah, and I definitely needed some human artists to put all that together. As far as using AI for coding, I don't use AI for writing my game in general. I just use it for figuring out how to interface with different third-party libraries, different APIs. So I mainly used ChatGPT for that kind of coding assistance. Whenever ChatGPT was unable to come up with something, like I wasn't happy with its results, then I would look to Claude, and Claude could usually do it. And once in a while, Grok was the one who came up with a solution for some obscure issue I was having or whatever. So yeah, I love using AI for coding assistance for integrating with different libraries. Greatly speeds up development, much nicer than slogging through API documentation and Stack Overflow posts. As a caveat, the AI logic was usually pretty sound, but the syntax tended to be like 80% correct, and I needed to manually fix the other 20%. I think part of that is due to limited training data and evolving APIs. So limited training data meaning for something like back endless, I don't think there's probably that large of a code base sample that's going in to train these AIs versus something more popular and ubiquitous like Firebase. For sound and music, I was just going to use Suno to create some Egyptian background music, but I couldn't get it to work right. I couldn't get the sound I wanted. And so all the in-game music is from the Envato commercial asset library. I'm really happy with that. I later tried using Suno to create my Perilous Quest Sonic logo, but the tracks were always too long. And so I ended up using 11 Labs, which was able to create a fairly short piece of music, but then I had to abridge it a little bit manually, mix together a couple elements of it to create the Perilous Quest theme. And then as far as sound effects, most sound effects are Envato assets, a few are from SoundSnap. And I became aware over the course of working on this game that 11 Labs is apparently doing a great job with AI sound effects, but I was not aware of them at that point in time. So maybe next game, I will experiment with them. Now, how did my 2 to 4 weeks, or how did my month of development turn into 1 year of development? Well, now the game code was 45% of the dev time, like I mentioned. And so the 7 months to achieve the MVP would be 3.15 months of dedicated work if I wasn't also working on the game framework and the other infrastructure. So that's not too bad, especially considering the extra things I added. Let me redo this slide. Now, how did my 1 month of development turn into 1 year of development? Well, the game code was 45% of the dev time, so 7 months to achieve an MVP would be 3.15 months if I was just working on that directly, if I wasn't also working on the game framework and other infrastructure. So that's not too bad. And then rule of thumb also is to always multiply programmer estimates by pi. So it's dorky, but it's not far from the truth. So my 1 month would, by that rule, would become 3.14 months. So pretty much spot on in a way. Now, of course, I also had a lot of feature creep not a lot. I had a big chunk of feature creep with adding the back end, but I also had some, I guess, scope creep and implementation pivots, such as using AI art instead of commercial art assets and using commercial music assets instead of AI music. The latter, the music, I don't think that impacted the timeline too much. Using the AI art, I think that definitely blew up the scope. But I'm very happy with the result. Would do the same thing again. I just would not launch. I would just not wait until my back end was complete. I would just go ahead and launch the MVP, probably even without ads. Like in the beginning, having the ads can backfire, as I will show you shortly, but in a way. So yeah, right now, if I had to do this part over again, I would just launch without the backend accounts and leaderboard, without the backend, and without any ads, and just try and build a player base, and and modify the game, improve the game. So as it was, I waited to add the backend, a couple extra months on it, and then I had to launch without it. And the reason for that is that Apple rejected me several times for more minor things, like if the player had already unlocked the premium version, which is the only thing you can buy, then I hid the restore purchases button, but they were like, no, the restore purchases button has to always be available or always be visible. So, that's fine, whatever. But my first several rejections leading up to Christmas were about sort of more trivial stuff or stuff that was easy to change. And then like right coming down to the deadline, if I could possibly get it out by Christmas, they're like, oh, if you have user accounts, users have to be able to delete their account from within the app. And I didn't have that. I didn't want to tack it on real quick. But also, it's just as well in that case that they had that rule, because I also thought I didn't have backend lists quite done on Android at that point. I thought it was going to be another day or two of work, but it ended up adding an extra 1 to 2 weeks to get things like figure out what was going on with Android and then make some changes to the way iOS worked with the backend as well. So yeah, it was not done. Anyhow, AI made numerous mistakes with backendless code, and like I mentioned, is probably just not well trained on that. AI is probably better trained at writing Firebase code. So I'm happy with backendless overall. I'm probably just going to stick with them because I got my infrastructure now. But if I had it to do all over again, I would probably choose Firebase because I think it's better supported by AI. And I'm sure it works with, per the next slide. So I don't want to go over all this stuff. You can pause and read it if you're interested on my issues with backendless on iOS versus Android. And yeah, and I'm sure like Firebase would not have this problem either. Now I started out launching with Google Ads, or also called AdMob, and it's one of the oldest ad SDKs. And why not use it? It's Google plus tried and true. Here's why not use it: because Google's AI or machine learning or whatever detects potential fraud using engagement metrics of established titles, like titles with a decent player base. And so when an indie game only has a handful of players, Google doesn't take that sample size into account, and it's like getting some weird statistics, like way too many people clicking on the ads or not clicking on ads or whatever. And so it interprets just these uh, normal statistical variations on a small sample size as fraud and shuts off the ad supply. So I launched on Christmas, and like 2 days later, Google's like, "We're shutting off your ads." Just automated email, AI email, because things look a little funny. And seriously, there were probably only 3 to 5 players or something at that point. So, I think that's what happened. I talked it over with ChatGPT, and this is essentially what it. I had this idea, and ChatGPT confirmed it. Yeah, it's probably what's happening. I was going to use AppLovin. Turns out they only accept established studios as partners. When you go to sign up for them, they're like, "Well, like you need a game in the App Store." So then I'm like, "Fine, here's my game." But then they're like, declining to work with me. So that sucks. Screw them. But I had heard about Unity ads. I just assumed that it would only work with Unity games. So once I finally figured out that Unity ads works with any iPhone or Android game, not just Unity games, then I realized that was the way to go. And it's, basically like a nice, straightforward system, and have not had any problems with them. Now, one thing I learned about meta ads that I'll mention is if you want to advertise your game on Meta, on Facebook or Instagram, you have to incorporate the Facebook SDK in the game itself to be able to advertise it. So that's something you might want to look at, earlier. And it's a tedious setup. You need all these accounts through all these different kinds of Meta accounts to get going. And here's the big thing. When I started advertising this game through Meta, I started it running, set my ad spend pretty high, like $50 a day, kind of see what happened. Then a couple hours later, I get fraud alerts from my bank. And turns out what Facebook does is they charge you your accumulated spend on advertising in very small amounts in the beginning. So the history of my payment, my charges to the card were like every, hour or even less, or even more frequent than that. Charging my card $2, $2, $2, $3, $3, $3. So I don't blame my card for my bank for thinking that was sketchy. So my advice now, and Facebook does increase their threshold over time, and so. Yeah, I would say just set your ad spend low the very first day to like $5, and then maybe double it each day, and that prevents Facebook from nickel and diming you to raise flags with the banks. And so now I think I've got my Facebook set at $15 a day now for iPhone and also for Android separately. And I think they're charging me, just $15 a day on my card or at a time, or maybe even $30 for them combined. Anyhow, that's a caveat about Meta. I'm advertising on both Google Ads and Facebook ads, Meta ads. It feels like I'm getting more traction, more actual users from Meta. Like, it's hard to tell for sure. But yeah, just feels like I'm actually getting more users through Meta. Like maybe it's I'm able to target it more towards the people who are actually interested. I don't know. So another big lesson I've learned now, I'm still learning, is you need to add an app rating system soon after launch. So as a player, I'm not a big fan of apps that are always urging me to give them an app store rating. I hadn't really thought it through. And now, as a game developer, I can see that very few of my regular players are rating the game so far. It's only people who are experiencing some kind of technical difficulty or frustration with the game. So yeah, right now all my ratings are pretty low. So I need to fix that. And yeah, it's not essential for minimum viable product, but I think it should be added pretty soon to build up that. Yeah, like you can skip monetization, you can skip the back end, all that, but it needs to have the app rating so that people who enjoy the game are encouraged to rate it. And I'll show you my solution for it that I'm working on currently. So I'm working on a new release right now. My magic, some random stuff if you've played the game, but magic scrolls, it's too easy to get them. I've got too many all the time. They're supposed to be a little more special. So I need to make them more rare. So instead of giving them at the end of every level, I'll just give them under certain circumstances. You can read that. The only crashes I'm getting on Apple or on iOS are on iPhone 7 Plus. So I've got one on the way and need to fix the game for that. I'm going to create a random UUID on App Start, send that to my server so I can use that to anonymously track active users. Need to implement rate the app. Here's my solution for that. People are just going to get basically a one-time ask, like, are you enjoying the game, or better words to that effect, and they'll pick like happy face, sad face, neutral face, whatever, something like that. And then if they say they're enjoying the game, just something real simple. If they're enjoying the game, then I'll ask them if they want to rate the game, and so that way I'll filter out the people who are not enjoying the game, but of course they can still go rate it themselves later. But yeah, I'll only go to the extra effort of popping up the app rating dialog if people are liking the game. All right, so for next steps, I'm going to finish and release version 1.3. I'm going to spend additional time marketing and promoting Tomb Sweeper, so of which this video is part of that, this devlog. I enjoy making devlogs, and I've just not dedicated much time to that over the past year. So it's a win-win-win. Also, it's a nice little sort of summary and time capsule of everything that went into making this game. So it'll be a nice reference for myself later down the road as well. In a few months, I will move on to the next project, which is finally finishing Axor the Mighty, a tactical sort of puzzle combat game I've been working on for years now. I've restarted it 3 times, and I'm going to continue the 3rd restart and finally get it done. For various reasons I'll go into in an Axor devlog. But all the art and animation, sound and music, game design, that's all done. I just need to quickly re-implement it, and I'm looking forward to that. All right, the end. Thanks for watching, and feel free to follow me on X. My username is Brombrez, and I do more frequent devlog posts there than devlog videos on YouTube. All right, catch you later.